December 19th, 1944. If General George Smith Patton hadn't understood what was really happening that morning in Luxembourg, the war in Europe could have dragged on for another year, not months, a full year. Tens of thousands more United States soldiers would have died in frozen foxholes, not knowing their sacrifice could have been avoided. The man they called Old Blood and Guts, a nickname earned through years of leading from the front, charging into battle with pearl-handled pistols while other generals commanded from maps 50 miles behind the lines, was about to have the most devastating realization of his military career. An urgent message arrives at 3rd Army headquarters. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower wants George Smith Patton in Verdun, France. Tomorrow, emergency meeting. No explanation given, but Old Blood and Guts doesn't need an explanation. 3 days earlier, on December 16th, German forces smashed through United States lines. In the Ardennes forest, with 250,000 men and 1,000 tanks, the Battle of the Bulge has begun. American soldiers are surrounded, freezing, dying. Everyone thinks George Smith Patton is being summoned to discuss rescue operations. They're wrong. As Patton stares at that summons, his mind isn't on the immediate crisis. He's thinking about something that happened 4 months ago. A decision made in August 1944 that he'd fought against with every fiber of his being. A decision he'd been overruled on. A decision that haunted his sleep. And now, as dawn breaks over Luxembourg, Old Blood and Guts realizes with absolute clarity that Eisenhower's August decision made this December disaster inevitable. This wasn't a tactical error. This was a strategic catastrophe that gifted Adolf Hitler the time, space, and resources to launch the largest battle the United States Army would fight in the entire war. General George Smith Patton had predicted this. He'd warned about it. He'd screamed about it in meeting rooms. He'd been ignored. And now, American boys were dying in the snow because politicians in uniform had chosen caution over courage. This is the story of that moment when Old Blood and Guts realized the truth, what that catastrophic decision was, and why military historians still debate whether George Smith Patton was right 80 years later. This is what happened next. To understand Patton's moment of horrifying clarity, we need to go back to August 1944, because that's when everything went wrong. The situation. D-Day was June 6th. By early August, Allied forces had broken out of Normandy. Operation Cobra, the breakout offensive, had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest predictions. German forces in France weren't retreating. They were collapsing, disintegrating, running. And leading the chase was General George Smith Patton and his 3rd Army. Old Blood and Guts was doing what he did best, moving. Fast, hitting hard, showing no mercy. His tanks were racing across France so quickly that headquarters couldn't update maps fast enough. French towns marked as heavily defended were being captured before German commanders even knew they were threatened. By late August, George Smith Patton's forces reached the Moselle River, near the German border. He was roughly 100 miles from the Rhine, Germany's last major natural barrier. Beyond the Rhine lay the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heart of Nazi war production. And Patton believed, no, he knew, that if given adequate fuel and supplies, 3rd Army could cross the Rhine by September, maybe reach the Ruhr by October. If the Allies captured the Ruhr, Germany's ability to continue the war would collapse. Game over, war won by Christmas. The intelligence supported this assessment. German forces in the West were shattered. Their logistics had broken down completely. This wasn't an organized withdrawal, this was a rout. Then came the decision that would change everything. August 23, 1944. Supreme Headquarters issues new orders. Supreme Commander Eisenhower has made his choice. Broad front advance. What does this mean? Instead of concentrating all supplies and support behind one massive thrust into Germany, either Patton's 3rd Army in the south or British field, Marshal Montgomery's 21st Army Group in the north, Eisenhower decided all armies would advance together on a broad front. The reasoning seemed sound. A broad front was safer, less risky. If one army got in trouble, others could support. The advance would be methodical, organized, professional. But there was a problem, a massive problem: logistics. The Allied supply system was already stretched to its breaking point. There wasn't enough fuel for everyone to advance at full speed simultaneously. So, Eisenhower made another choice. He prioritized Montgomery's upcoming Market Garden operation in the north, an airborne assault to capture bridges in Holland and open a route to the Ruhr. This left General George Smith Patton's Third Army essentially frozen in place, fuel rationed, ordered to halt. Old Blood and Guts was 100 miles from the Rhine with momentum, with the enemy in disarray, with victory in his grasp. And he was ordered to stop. The meeting where George Smith Patton learned of this decision became legendary. He didn't quietly accept it. He fought loudly. "Give me the gasoline," Patton demanded, "and I'll be in Germany in 2 days. Across the Rhine in a week. The war will be over by Christmas." Other officers shook their heads. Too risky, too aggressive. What about supply lines? What about flanks? What about the other armies? What about winning the goddamn war? Old Blood and Guts shot back. "Every day we sit here consolidating is a day the Germans use to reorganize. We have them beaten right now. But if we give them time..." He was overruled. The fuel went to Montgomery. Patton's diary entry from August 28, 1944, reveals his fury. "We have the Germans on the run, but we're stopping to consolidate. We're giving them time to regroup. This is the biggest mistake of the war. Mark my words, we will pay for this in blood." George Smith Patton made 3 core arguments against Eisenhower's decision, and each one proved prophetic. First, the window is closing. German disorganization was temporary. Given time, they would reorganize, bring up reserves, establish defensive lines. But right now, in August, they were vulnerable. Every day of delay made eventual victory more costly. Second, logistics favor concentration. Eisenhower claimed a broad front was logistically safer. Old Blood and Guts argued the opposite. Instead of giving 3 armies 50% of what they need, give one army 150%. A fast-moving army living off captured supplies and momentum could advance farther on the same fuel than 3 slow-moving armies. Third, strategic versus tactical thinking. Eisenhower was thinking tactically, worrying about exposed flanks, potential counterattacks, individual army vulnerabilities. George Smith Patton was thinking strategically. The goal wasn't to safely advance a few miles. The goal was to end the war. That required taking risks for decisive results. "I'd rather have a German division behind me," Patton famously declared, "than a month of slow advance ahead of me." But Eisenhower wouldn't budge. The decision was made. Market Garden would get priority. Montgomery would lead the thrust north through Holland. Old Blood and Guts would wait. Patton wrote bitterly, "We have fuel to reach the Rhine, but it's being given to Monty so he can fail spectacularly in Holland instead of letting us succeed in Germany." This prediction proved devastatingly accurate. Could George Smith Patton have actually done it? Could Third Army have reached the Rhine in September? The next 4 months would answer that question in the worst possible way. September 1944. The consequences begin. General George Smith Patton's Third Army sits near the German border, unable to advance due to fuel shortages. Old Blood and Guts watches in furious impotence as the opportunity of a lifetime slips away. Meanwhile, to the north, Montgomery launches Market Garden on September the 17th. The plan? Drop 3 airborne divisions to capture bridges across major rivers in Holland, creating a corridor for armored forces to punch through to the Rhine and beyond. The result? Catastrophic failure. The crucial bridge at Arnhem isn't captured. British paratroopers are surrounded and destroyed. The operation ends in costly defeat with over 17,000 Allied casualties. Patton's diary entry from September 25th. "While I sit here unable to advance for lack of fuel, we throw away an entire airborne corps. In Holland, the fuel wasted on that disaster could have put me across the Rhine 2 weeks ago. But the damage went beyond Market Garden's failure. Something far more dangerous had happened during September's pause. The Germans had reorganized. When Third Army finally received fuel and resumed offensive operations in October, everything had changed. The fleeing, disorganized enemy of August had been replaced by prepared defensive positions. Fresh divisions had arrived. Fortifications had been improved. The weather turned. Rain, mud, everything that favors defenders. What would have been a mobile breakthrough in August became a grinding, bloody slog in October. The statistics tell the story. During August's rapid advance, Third Army took relatively light casualties while capturing tens of thousands of Germans. In October and November, casualties multiplied, while progress measured in yards rather than miles. October 1944. George Smith Patton's forces fight through the Siegfried Line, Germany's border fortifications. These positions had been lightly manned and poorly supplied in August. By October, they're fully garrisoned and heavily defended. United States soldiers die for every pillbox, every bunker, every fortified village. Old Blood and Guts writes, "We are fighting in November for positions we could have walked through in August. Every day of delay in August cost us weeks of fighting now. And it's costing lives, American lives." German commanders later admitted that if the Allies had pushed hard in August and September, Western defenses weren't ready to stop them. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of German forces in the West, stated after the war, "If Patton had been allowed to continue his advance in August, we could not have stopped him. Our forces were in complete disarray, but we were given time, and we used it." This was exactly what General George Smith Patton had predicted, but the worst was yet to come. November 1944. German High Command, deep in secret planning, prepares a massive counteroffensive. Hitler personally oversees the operation, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. The plan? Assemble 250,000 soldiers and 1,000 tanks in secret. Smash through weakly held United States positions in the Ardennes forest. Drive to Antwerp, splitting Allied armies in half. Here's the crucial question. How did Germany, supposedly beaten and disorganized, have the strength for this massive offensive? Because they'd been given time. Time to reorganize shattered divisions. Time to build up fuel reserves. Time to manufacture new tanks. Time to train replacements. Time to establish defensive positions that freed up mobile forces for offensive operations. General George Smith Patton had warned that stopping in August would give Germany breathing room. He'd been told such concerns were overblown. The German army was finished. Old Blood and Guts. Knew better. His intelligence officers were tracking German activity in the Ardennes. Something was building. Third Army headquarters sent warnings to higher command. The warnings were largely dismissed. Then, December 16th, 1944, 0530 hours. Hell breaks loose. Over 200,000 German soldiers, supported by 1,000 tanks and assault guns, pour through the Ardennes. They strike the weakest part of the United States line. Units recovering from earlier battles spread thin across a quiet sector. The assault is devastating. Entire American units are surrounded. Communications break down. Command and control collapse. Thousands of United States soldiers are captured in the first 48 hours. The German offensive creates a massive bulge in Allied lines, soon to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. This is the crisis that prompts Eisenhower's emergency summons to George Smith Patton. But Old Blood and Guts isn't thinking about the immediate tactical situation as he prepares for that meeting. He's thinking about August, about September, about the months of warnings ignored. He's thinking about the strategic miscalculation that made this disaster possible. December 19th, 1944. General George Smith Patton arrives in Verdun for the emergency conference. The room is filled with senior Allied commanders. The mood is grim. Some are suggesting pulling back, shortening defensive lines, going on the defensive. Eisenhower asks each commander for assessments. The picture is bleak. German forces are advancing rapidly. United States troops in Bastogne are surrounded. The situation is potentially catastrophic. Then Eisenhower turns to Patton. "George, I want you to disengage from your current offensive, turn your army 90 degrees north, and counterattack into the German flank. How soon can you attack?" The room goes silent. Everyone understands what's being asked. Third Army is actively engaged in major offensive operations to the east. To disengage, pivot 90 degrees, and attack in a completely different direction would require moving hundreds of thousands of men and thousands of vehicles through winter weather on congested roads. It's nearly impossible. Most commanders would ask for 2 weeks minimum to plan and execute such a movement. General George Smith Patton looks Eisenhower in the eye. I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. Several officers laugh, thinking he's joking. Others look shocked. One general mutters, "Don't be ridiculous." But Old Blood and Guts isn't joking. He's dead serious. His staff had anticipated this possibility and had already prepared contingency plans. While everyone else was caught by surprise, George Smith Patton was ready. "The Kraut stuck his head in a meat grinder," Patton says, "and this time I've got hold of the handle." As the meeting continues and plans solidify, George Smith, Patton sits there thinking. He later recorded his thoughts in his diary that night, and the entry reveals everything. "We are having to perform a miracle to save a situation that should never have existed. If we had pushed hard in August and September instead of stopping to consolidate, we would be beyond the Rhine now, possibly in Berlin. Germany wouldn't have had the resources, positions, or breathing room to launch this counteroffensive. Instead, we gave them 4 months to regroup. We gave them time to build up reserves. We gave them time to prepare this attack. And now, American soldiers are dying in the snow, surrounded and freezing, because someone in August valued political caution over military decisiveness. This is the moment. This is when General George Smith Patton fully articulates what he's been realizing over the previous months. Eisenhower's decision for a broad front advance rather than a concentrated thrust hadn't just delayed victory. It had created the conditions that made the Battle of the Bulge possible. Old Blood and Guts believed this was the worst strategic decision of the war, and he was about to prove what could have been achieved if his approach had been adopted in August. December 20th, 1944. While other commanders were still planning, General George Smith Patton was already moving. Third Army headquarters became a storm of activity. Staff officers who'd secretly prepared contingency plans now executed them at lightning speed. Orders went out to 3 divisions, the 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the 80th Infantry Division. Disengage from current positions, turn north, attack toward Bastogne. Military experts considered what Patton was attempting virtually impossible. To pivot an entire army of that size in winter weather and launch a coordinated attack in 48 hours violated every principle of deliberate military planning. But Old Blood and Guts had never cared much for what experts considered possible. December 21st. Third Army units begin their 90-degree pivot. Tens of thousands of vehicles fill roads designed for local traffic. Snow falls. Temperatures plunge below freezing. Traffic jams develop. Some units get lost in the darkness, but they keep moving. George Smith Patton himself drives up and down the columns in his command car, visible to every soldier, urging them forward. "Drive all night if you have to," he orders. "American soldiers are surrounded and dying. We're going to save them." This is why they called him Old Blood and Guts. While other generals commanded from heated headquarters, Patton was in the weather, in the cold, with his men. December 22nd. The attack begins. Third Army smashes into the southern flank of the German offensive. The Germans, focused on their drive west toward Antwerp, are caught completely off guard by this powerful counterattack from the south. Exactly 48 hours after promising Eisenhower he would attack, General George Smith Patton delivered. The German High Command was stunned. They had counted on weeks before the Allies could organize a meaningful counteroffensive. Instead, in 2 days, an entire United States Army had pivoted and struck with overwhelming force. German General Alfred Jodl later admitted, "We knew Patton was dangerous, but what he accomplished in those 48 hours was beyond our comprehension. Only Patton could have done it." But the battle was far from over. Between Third Army and surrounded Bastogne lay miles of enemy-held territory, fierce resistance, and brutal winter weather. December 23rd. Weather clears. Allied aircraft can finally fly support missions. General George Smith Patton's forces push north, fighting for every mile. The 4th Armored Division, leading the relief effort, encounters fanatical German resistance. Inside Bastogne, the situation grows desperate. The 101st Airborne Division and attached units are surrounded, low on ammunition, low on medical supplies, running out of time. German commanders deliver an ultimatum: surrender or be annihilated. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, commanding United States forces in Bastogne, sends back a one-word reply: nuts. But everyone knows the defenders can't hold much longer without relief. Everything depends on whether Old Blood and Guts can break through in time. December 24th. Christmas Eve. Third Army forces are within miles of Bastogne, but the Germans throw everything they have into stopping them. Savage fighting erupts, tank battles, close combat, house-to-house fighting in frozen villages. George Smith Patton drives to forward positions, exposing himself to artillery fire. His staff begs him to stay back. He refuses. "How can I ask these boys to do the impossible if I'm sitting in a safe bunker?" Old Blood and Guts responds. December 25th. Christmas Day. The breakthrough hasn't happened. Some officers quietly suggest it might not be possible. Maybe they should consolidate, try a different approach. Patton explodes. "We don't have time for different approaches. Those men in Bastogne don't have time. We attack and we keep attacking until we break through or I run out of soldiers." December 26th, 1944, 1645 hours. Elements of the 4th Armored Division, spearheading 3rd Army's attack, make contact with defenders in Bastogne. The siege is broken. Old Blood and Guts had done it. In 7 days, General George Smith Patton had disengaged from active operations, pivoted his entire army 90 degrees, attacked through winter conditions, and relieved a surrounded force that military experts had written off as lost. It was one of the most stunning military achievements of World War II. When news reached 3rd Army headquarters, even hardened staff officers had tears in their eyes. When Eisenhower received confirmation, he reportedly said, "Only George could have pulled this off." German commanders were equally impressed, though for different reasons. They realized that the Ardennes offensive, their last great gamble, had failed. Patton's relief of Bastogne broke the German timetable and morale simultaneously. But George Smith Patton took no satisfaction in this triumph. Yes, he'd accomplished the impossible. Yes, he'd saved thousands of United States soldiers. Yes, he'd helped turn the tide of Germany's last major offensive. But it shouldn't have been necessary. In his diary that night, Old Blood and Guts wrote, "We relieved Bastogne. We're pushing the Germans back. We're winning. But none of this should have happened. If we'd pressed our advantage in August, we'd already be in Germany. These boys wouldn't have had to fight and die in the snow at Christmas. This whole crisis was created by the decision to stop when we should have charged." Forward. January 1945. The Battle of the Bulge winds down. German forces retreat, having failed to reach their objectives. The offensive cost Hitler the last mobile reserves he had. From this point forward, Germany could only defend and retreat, but the cost to the United States was staggering. Over 89,000 American casualties, 19,000 killed, thousands more captured, wounded, or missing. General George Smith Patton couldn't stop thinking about August, about the decision to halt, about what might have been. Other commanders praised his Bastogne relief operation. Eisenhower publicly commended 3rd Army's brilliant maneuver and aggressive fighting spirit. The press called it a miracle, but Old Blood and Guts saw it differently. "We performed a miracle to fix a disaster that shouldn't have happened," he told his staff. "We're being praised for cleaning up a mess that was created by stopping in August." Captured German officers, interrogated after the battle, provided stunning confirmations of Patton's August warnings. They admitted that Germany's western defenses had been in complete disarray in late summer. They confirmed that if Allied forces had pushed hard in August and September, Germany couldn't have stopped them. General der Panzertruppe Hasse von Manteuffel, who commanded 5th Panzer Army during the Bulge, stated during interrogation, "We were given a gift in August and September. Your army stopped when we were beaten. We used that time to reorganize. Without it, we could never have launched the Ardennes offensive." This was exactly what General George Smith Patton had predicted 4 months earlier. The strategic consequences of Eisenhower's August decision became clearer as winter turned to spring. The war that Old Blood and Guts believed could have been won by Christmas 1944 now dragged into 1945. More battles, more casualties, more months of war. Germany's cities were bombed. Millions of civilians died. Concentration camps continued operating. Every day of delay meant more victims, more suffering, more death. George Smith Patton believed, and argued until his death, that if Allied forces had adopted a concentrated thrust strategy in August, the war would have ended months earlier. How many lives could have been saved? How much suffering prevented? We'll never know for certain. What we do know is that military historians continue debating this decision 80 years later. The argument breaks down into two camps. Those who support Patton argue the window was real. German sources confirm August-September 1944 was when Western defenses were most vulnerable. The cost was immense. Battles from September through February cost far more casualties than August's breakthrough. The Battle of the Bulge alone exceeded 89,000 United States casualties. Momentum matters. Military doctrine favors exploiting success and maintaining pressure. When you have an enemy in retreat, you press the advantage rather than pausing. Those who support Eisenhower argue logistics were genuinely constrained. The fuel shortage wasn't artificial. Perhaps concentrating resources on one thrust would have meant one army running out of fuel 50 miles deeper into Germany, surrounded and vulnerable. Risk assessment was sound. A concentrated thrust could have been cut off and destroyed if it outran supply lines. The broad front approach was safer. Political considerations were real. Eisenhower commanded an Allied coalition. He couldn't favor one national army over others or one general over another. Ultimate outcome was victory. Despite taking longer than Patton wanted, the Allies won decisively. But here's what tips the scales in George Smith Patton's favor for many historians. What happened when he was finally unleashed? March 1945. Third Army crosses the Rhine, the barrier. Patton had wanted to reach in September. Once across, Old Blood and Guts proves exactly what he'd claimed was possible. Third Army races through Germany, advancing up to 50 miles per day, capturing hundreds of thousands of German soldiers, overrunning defensive positions before they could be properly manned. In 3 weeks during March and April, George Smith Patton's forces advanced farther and faster than they had in the previous 6 months combined. This vindicated everything he'd argued in August. Given fuel, given freedom to exploit success, given permission to take risks, Third Army proved capable of exactly the kind of rapid, decisive advance that Old Blood and Guts had promised. The question haunts. What if he'd been allowed to do this in August? German commanders provided the answer. General der Panzertruppe Leo Geyer von Schweppenberg stated, "If Patton had been allowed to continue in August as he did in March, we could not have stopped him. Our defenses weren't prepared. The war would have ended in 1944. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt agreed. The decision to halt the Allied advance in August and September was the greatest gift Hitler received in the entire Western campaign. It gave us time we desperately needed. These weren't American generals defending their colleague. These were enemy commanders providing objective post-war analysis. General George Smith Patton never forgave Eisenhower for the August decision. Their relationship, already complicated by Patton's earlier controversies, never recovered. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Old Blood and Guts was increasingly vocal in his criticism. He believed political considerations and coalition management had been prioritized over military effectiveness. He believed thousands of United States soldiers had died unnecessarily because commanders valued caution over boldness. In September 1945, Patton gave an interview where he stated bluntly, "We could have won this war by Christmas '44 if we'd kept driving in August instead of stopping. Every life lost between September and May is a life that didn't need to be lost." This kind of public criticism of Eisenhower, who was now being celebrated as the supreme architect of Allied victory, was not well received. Patton was relieved of command of Third Army in October 1945. 2 months later, December 21, 1945, General George Smith Patton died from injuries sustained in a car accident in Germany. Old Blood and Guts never made it home to the United States. His final diary entries reveal a man convinced he'd been right, frustrated that history might remember Eisenhower's caution as wisdom rather than the costly mistake Patton believed it was. 80 years later, military academies around the world still study the decision. Staff colleges debate it. Historians write dissertations. The question remains, was Eisenhower's broad front strategy sound military planning, or was it, as General George Smith Patton believed, the worst decision of the war? Here's what makes this more than academic debate. The principles involved apply to every military conflict since. Do you prioritize safety or speed? Caution or aggression? Consolidated planning or exploitation of opportunity? Coalition unity or military effectiveness? The United States military has generally adopted Patton's philosophy in subsequent conflicts. The drive to Baghdad in 2003, the rapid advances in Afghanistan in 2001. These operations reflected old blood and guts' belief that speed, aggression, and exploitation of success produce better results than methodical caution. But the counterexamples exist too. Operations that outran their supply lines and paid the price. Forces that advanced too quickly and found themselves isolated. So, who was right? Perhaps the answer is that both approaches have merit, depending on circumstances. Perhaps the answer is that Eisenhower, commanding the entire Allied coalition with political pressures Patton didn't face, made the best decision he could with the information available. Or perhaps George Smith Patton was right. Perhaps August 1944 presented a unique window of opportunity that would never come again. Perhaps the decision to play it safe when boldness could have ended the war was indeed the worst decision of the entire conflict. What we know for certain is this. When General George Smith Patton sat in that meeting in Verdun on December 19, 1944, watching Allied commanders scramble to respond to a crisis he'd predicted, old blood and guts understood something profound. He understood that wars aren't just won by avoiding mistakes. They're won by seizing opportunities when they appear, even if those opportunities carry risks. He understood that the moment you stop advancing is the moment your enemy starts recovering. He understood that caution, taken too far, becomes its own form of recklessness. The recklessness of delay, of missed chances, of wars prolonged beyond necessity. And perhaps most importantly, George Smith Patton understood that history judges generals not just by whether they won, but by how quickly they won and how many lives they saved in the process. The legend of old blood and guts lives on precisely because he embodied a different philosophy of war. While others calculated risks, he calculated opportunities. While others worried about what could go wrong, he focused on what could go right. While others valued stability, he valued momentum. Was he always right? No. Did his aggressiveness sometimes create problems? Yes. Did his confrontational personality make him difficult to work with? Absolutely. But when United States soldiers were surrounded in Bastogne, with everyone saying rescue was impossible, it was George Smith Patton who said, "I can attack in 48 hours," and then did exactly that. When the opportunity to end the war early presented itself in August 1944, it was old blood and guts who recognized it, who fought for it, who begged to be unleashed. And when that opportunity was missed, when the consequences of that missed opportunity became devastatingly clear in December, it was George Smith Patton who understood exactly what had happened and why. This is why the United States military still studies him. This is why his portrait hangs in command centers. This is why every aggressive tank commander, every bold strategist, every officer who believes in speed and violence of action claims to be following in his footsteps. Because General George Smith Patton, the man they called old blood and guts, proved something fundamental about warfare, that fortune favors the bold, that hesitation kills, and that the greatest risk is sometimes refusing to take risks. December 19, 1944. The moment George Smith Patton realized Eisenhower had made the worst decision of the war wasn't just about one tactical choice. It was about two fundamentally different philosophies of how to fight and win. History records that Eisenhower's approach worked. The Allies won. Germany was defeated. But history also records that old blood and guts believed it could have been done faster, at lower cost, with fewer lives lost. And given what George Smith Patton accomplished when finally unleashed in March 1945, the rapid advances, the stunning victories, the proof of concept for exactly what he'd promised in August, it's hard not to wonder if he was right. We'll never know for certain. The counterfactual, what would have happened if Patton had gotten his way in August, remains one of World War II's great unanswerable questions. But we do know this. When American soldiers needed a miracle in December, when everyone said reaching Bastogne in 48 hours was impossible, General George Smith Patton delivered. And that's why they called him old blood and guts. That's why his legend endures. That's why every December, military historians remember not just the Battle of the Bulge, but the August decision that made it possible, and the general who saw it coming. If this story of Old Blood and Guts' greatest triumph and his most bitter vindication moved you, hit subscribe. We're bringing you more untold stories of General George Smith Patton, the most aggressive, controversial, and effective combat commander in United States military history. Stories of battles won against impossible odds. Stories of decisions that changed the course of the war. Stories that prove why George Smith Patton remains the standard by which all combat generals are measured. The legend of Old Blood and Guts continues, and we're telling the stories history forgot. Until next time, remember what General George Smith Patton himself said. A good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan executed next week. Old Blood and Guts lived by that principle, and history remembers him for it.